Hi everybody, welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you for joining us. Let's get a quick take on the news that the parent company that owns the Denver Post is looking to, quote, ready its newspaper properties for sale. Patty Cahoon from Westward. Now, none of the news mentioned the Denver Post exactly, but obviously this might change a big deal here in Colorado. What do you think?
Well, and Denver Post is one of their big properties, and this, the makeup of the ownership had changed from where it had been in the Scudder days and with Dean Singleton, and now they look like they want to get rid of it because their daily papers aren't doing so well. What I hope is they have Phil Anschutz's number on speed dial. Phil Anschutz bought the Gazette-Telegraph down in Colorado Springs. I would hate to see the Denver Post go to out-of-state hands or disappear altogether. So maybe Phil Anschutz would be better than the devil you don't know. That's
a very good point. Amy Oliver Cook, executive over at the Independence Institute. What do you think about the prognosis? Do you think there's going to be a local buyer for the Denver Post?
Listen, I hope so, because that's part of the problem with a lot of what's happened with newspapers. If they've consolidated, they've become corporate as opposed to really appealing to local news. If you talk to anybody in small towns, they'll read their local newspaper cover to cover. So I think this is a reflection of the market. People want it to go in a different direction, so let's hope there's a local buyer.
Craig Silverman, attorney with Silverman & Levis, and a more regular host that we're hearing off and on KNUS. Do you think there's a local buyer? Do you think it's going to be more of a local newspaper again with a local owner?
Well, we hope so. I think Denver is the better one. We have a thriving newspaper. In fact, I think it was a lot better one we had two. But the Denver Post seems to be dying, sort of like an elderly person, kind of getting smaller every day. I don't know about local buyers. Maybe George Soros will buy it. I mean, he's thrown a lot of money at the marijuana issue here in Colorado, and the Denver Post has become pro-marijuana almost as much as Westward. Maybe the Koch brothers will buy it. And they are in favor of legal marijuana, too. You would never know that from listening to the Democrats castigate them. But Phil Anschutz might be an option. He certainly has the money, and he got a little burned with the radio venture in Denver. But now that he's got the Gazette-Telegraph, we could do worse than Phil Anschutz.
Pam, wrap it up for us. Is it all tied up in a nice little bow for Phil Anschutz, or is there somebody else out there?
Well, clearly he's the first person you think of, but I'm sure there'll be other local suitors for the Post, or at least I hope there are. And I think we all agree, your paper probably is more popular and is more popular when it really reflects what's going on in the community. And really to have that, you need local ownership, local control. If you get out of state ownership or control, their priorities are going to be different, primarily the bottom line as opposed to the quality necessarily of reporting and focusing on what's really of interest in that community.
Let's get to it. The United States Supreme Court sent shockwaves through political circles this week when it struck down a major campaign fundraising law. The court found that the decades-old law that restricted how many different campaigns one donor organization could donate to was unconstitutional. Patty, Colorado is going to be the focal point for congressional races, for Senate races, for ballot issues. How do you think this decision is going to affect Colorado?
Well, I think we're going to be like 4 years ago when there was no TV time left that you could buy because the campaigns were buying all of it. Now there will just be more money to do it. When that decision came down, you could hear the late Ken Gordon flipping his lid. The guy who had founded Clean Slate was so concerned about campaign finance. And you could hear the Koch brothers, we've talked about, popping the cork, because it just means those with a lot of money will be able to give to a lot more people. And it's going to make a big difference nationally because you'll be able to pick and choose campaigns across the country that you can help influence that way. The First Amendment, I'm not the lawyer at the table, we'll hear from them.
We have plenty.
I certainly know that the First Amendment is a double-edged sword. No one supports it more than I do. No one gets in more trouble for it than I do, probably. But it's a First Amendment issue, and you can see why the Supreme Court went the way they did, but still, campaign finance has to have some kind of reform just so people are not out there buying their elections.
Amy, Colorado's been a purple state really for a long time, and recently in the last 10, 15 years, that status has brought a lot of attention and a lot of national money to Colorado. Is this just going to turn what was once a fire hose now into a full-on river of money coming to Colorado?
Well, interesting. I think the consultant class is probably thrilled. I think certainly some news stations are going to be, or TV stations are going to be thrilled, as you're right, TV time just got more expensive. But this affects, I was looking at the numbers, I think it's 644 donors total that are impacted by this. Will there be more attention on Colorado? Will there be more money? Probably, but I got to tell you, even in the last election, when we spent $12 million on a ballot measure, we're looking at a Senate race that could be upwards of $30 million. As somebody who, I wholly support First Amendment. I think the Supreme Court made the right decision. I think if we have transparency and disclosure, we know who those people are, then you know who's trying to, influence the election.
Craig, he makes an interesting point. We've already seen record amounts of cash being spent in Colorado. Are we about to eclipse those, or is there a certain capacity that can be spent in a state with 4 million people?
I think it's like sports stars' salaries. It will always go up, and every year we'll complain about it. But I don't think this will make a huge difference because of the soft money, the ability to influence the debate. We're talking about the Denver Post. It's my perception that they favor John Hickenlooper, which is okay. But, and they get to spend unlimited amounts of money boosting John Hickenlooper. Again, that's okay. That's their First Amendment right. Somebody should be able to compete. Talk about other rich people who might buy the Denver Post and have tried to influence the debate in Colorado. Bloomberg. He might buy the Post. He certainly weighs in on Colorado politics. And then you have the Pat Strikers, the Tim Gills. And so they can voice their opinion, and Lord knows they have, along with the Koch brothers. So they made their opinion clear. And for people on the left who say, well, this is just going to favor people on the right, no, the biggest givers have been people on the left, the Strikers, the Gills, and this guy, Tom Steyer, who's an attorney, made his money at Goldman Sachs. His big issue is the environment, and he's going to try to influence the fracking debate, which we'll talk about. So if you close up one hole, it shoots through another. Money is part of politics now, and according to the Supreme Court, it equals free speech.
Penn, is this a just distinct free speech issue, or are there deeper issues about campaign financing here?
Well, it is beyond a free speech issue, and at its core, it's a political issue, and I mean that in a bigger picture context. When we look at these things, we should never forget the fact that there are three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. So the judiciary is a branch of government. Despite what people want to believe, the judiciary is a political place in a political environment, which is why we see these 5-4 decisions, because as political fortunes swing and different presidents serve and they make different appointments, it's amazing how 9 people can all interpret the same piece of paper that's never been significantly amended in some of these respects in over 200 years, vastly different ways. So the amount of money that's going to flood into the state is going to be stupid the next 2 election cycles. That's just the only way to put it. And, if you're a person writing checks for $100 or $200, you better volunteer to show up. You better vote, because that's the only way to really deal with the impact of big money in elections. Is Coloradans need to get up, get registered, and go vote, because money will respond to how people are voting. There are going to be efforts to shape opinions and to shape perceptions, but if you vote and articulate your belief and what you think, that's ultimately going to trump big money in politics. That's the only hope we have.
I think you raised a great point. Last year's amendment issue was a great point. $12 million for really the only issue on the ballot. The voters didn't go for it. You're right, it comes down to votes. According to his campaign, Republican gubernatorial candidate Bob O'Prey submitted over 23,000 signatures on Monday to be placed in the GOP primary ballot. Fellow candidate Tom Tancredo, who is also going the petition route, turned in his signatures last week, but also plans to go through the state party assembly on April 12th. Amy, there's a little bit of inside baseball here about if you go to the assembly and you've already turned in your petitions, but if you don't get 10% at the assembly, those petitions are basically null and void. Is Tancredo at risk of getting under that 10% threshold, or is that secured?
I am the worst at prognosticating on candidates, so let me just say that right now.
We don't have a very good record in the CIO table, so don't worry about that. Don't worry about that.
I would be shocked if Tom Tancredo didn't make the ballot at the assembly. And you know what I love about our system, I mean, you have people who hate the caucus, and then you have grassroots people or who hate the delegate process, and you have people who's, well, I'm not going to vote for anybody who avoids the assembly. Listen, what I love about it is you can do either one or both if you choose. More power to him. I mean, I think he's probably going to make the ballot. I would be shocked if he didn't, but my full disclaimer, I'm lousy at prognosticating, so it could be the kiss of death for him.
We've had a variety of kisses of death at this table, so don't worry about it. Craig, was this a good decision for Tom to go both routes?
Well, I mean, that gives rise to the both ways Tancredo situation, but I think somebody has that nickname already. The bottom line is Tom will probably be on the ballot, but I don't see a viable path toward the nomination, and an even less likely chance of him winning against John Hickenlooper. For starters, he's just not that aligned with the Republican Party. He doesn't like them, and they don't like him. And so that's a problem. I expect the people who have an R behind their name would prefer to vote for somebody who's always been Mr. Republican. And I think that might be Bob Beaupre. He served as the chair of the Colorado Republican Party. He's been a loyal Republican, except when he decided to back Tom Tancredo over Dan Mays. And Tom Tancredo remembers that, and he likes Bob, genuinely likes Bob. And I expect at some point he will defer to Bob Beaupre. He said that he would have months earlier if Bob would have gotten in earlier. Bob is trying to be the front runner, and I think he's likable. I think the Republicans need to decide who can get in there with John Hickenlooper at a debate, and if he does have a glass chin, the governor, which a lot of people think he does, who could effectively throw the punch at John Hickenlooper to knock him down. That's how the Republicans are going to make that decision. I don't think Tom Tancredo's the right guy to debate John Hickenlooper. For all his statements that are controversial and colorful, I don't think Tom's a great debater.
And I know Tom got pretty good marks when it was the three-way debate between Mays, Tancredo, and Hickenlooper last time, but that was an entirely different situation. I mean, I think many claim that Hickenlooper is going to basically in bubble wrap to just, if you don't screw this up, it's yours. Just don't. So that's definitely a different scenario. Penn, when you look at Tancredo's strategy, if you were consulting him, what would you say to it, and what do you think about all the other folks who are going to be at the assembly, likely when you have Steve House, you have Greg Brophy, you have Mike Kopp. There's a lot of people, Roni Sylvester, there's a lot of people going for the nomination.
You know, first of all, Tom is a very bright guy, and he's going to have good, experienced political hands around him. I'm sure they've calculated this. They've looked at everybody who's going to be at the assembly, and they figured, you know, there's no way we're going to come away with less than 10%. If there is, we probably shouldn't be in this in the first instance. So my guess is that they've calculated that. There are a number of folks who will be there, but if they each get 2, 3, 4%, it isn't really going to matter because it's easily enough for Tom to hit his threshold. I disagree with something Craig said a moment ago. I do think that one of the things that Tom showed last cycle is that he is a viable candidate. But for some fluky circumstances, he probably would have been the Republican nominee. He showed much better than Dan Mays did, where everybody was concerned whether the party would not be a major party anymore. I sat there election night, we were all wondering, is he going to hit 10%?
Yeah.
And he finally did. And as you described, many people in the three-way debates would tell you that if you close your eyes and just listened, Tancredo sounded the most credible, most knowledgeable, and most definitive about a wide range of issues, not just immigration. Many people thought Mays didn't make any sense, and as you said, many people thought, you know, Governor Hickenlooper was in bubble wrap and told not to bump into anything sharp. and so I think Tom is a little more viable than people think. there are a few issues he feels strongly about, and they're very tricky because I think some of them resonate with a broader cross-section of Colorado than a lot of people want to accept and believe. And the process will allow them to express their preference for Tom, who says these things, even though they may not want to publicly say, I believe it also.
Patty, we'll know a lot more after April 12th, but what do you think at this point?
Well, I think, first of all, next time we move up a primary, people should get a calendar out so they can figure out, do you have time, if you petition your way onto the ballot, to have those signatures counted so you don't have to go to the route that now Tancredo is going? Because he doesn't know if he'll get approved by the 12th. I think probably, well, who knows? His guests are going to count them quickly over at the Secretary of State's office, just so he won't be taking any percentage of the vote. If he was on the ballot, would Tancredo be able to skip it? What will be interesting is if Tancredo goes through, and I think he will get on the ballot both ways, he will take votes from somebody. So somebody else isn't going to get on the ballot because of Tancredo. We had the possibility of 5 different candidates. If they need 30%, if you've got Beaupre petitioning, you've got Tancredo petitioning, this will knock somebody else off. But I also think Tancredo, I don't know what Republicans you've been talking to, Craig, lately, but they weren't so happy with the Republican Party 4 years ago when 10% went for Dan Mays. I mean, and presumably those were all Republicans, but who knows? And 36%, not all Republicans, but a big part of the party had no problem voting for Tom Tancredo, as opposed to going with the duly noted, the duly appointed candidate of the Republican Party, which Bob Beaupre had just led. So I think Tancredo has a good shot of at least livening up this election. He was good at the debates 4 years ago.
The livening up part, I think, is absolutely assured. 2 very different developments happened over the issue of fracking this week. The city of Brighton repealed its moratorium after citizens complained the law was anti-business. Meanwhile, the Colorado Community Rights ballot issue, which would grant cities the right to ban any industry within its borders, passed a major state title board challenge this week. Craig, fracking is going to be a big issue even past the election, but it's just growing at this point. What did you make of the developments happen this week?
Well, it's confusing because I did not get a science degree, and it's sort of like global warming, climate change. It's hard for us to figure out what is credible. I know there's this organization called CRED, and I watched you guys talk about them a week ago, where they've signed up Bill Owens, Roy Romer, Terrence Carroll, and Hank Brown. I'm curious as to whether those guys are being paid to be on that advisory committee. I know this organization has paid talk show hosts. It's kind of unusual to have talk show hosts say, hey, I've gone to the website, it's great, like you're pitching somebody who's, selling some service like, gold and silver. It just, I don't know if it is credible. I know this guy, Tom Steyer, who I've already referenced, he says it's not safe. He's got a lot of money. Jared Polis is on the other side, and he's not really susceptible to anybody buying his vote. So it'll be a heck of an issue. Brighton is in the middle of that Niobrara shell deposit. They're lucky. I mean, the people in Kiowa wish they were. Instead, they have to rely on a possible new casino. So when it comes to money, it's in the ground. And I think eventually people will say, hey, maybe we can reduce our taxes if we allow this to go forward. And ultimately, I think that's what happened in Brighton.
Penn, we have a city in Brighton that looks at it as anti-business, but then obviously there's going to be a lot of support for issues like the community rights ballot issue. What do you think?
I think what happened in Brighton and what happened with the ballot issue and what's going to happen with this whole campaign it just really illustrates the overall problem. And Craig sort of touched on it. Somebody who is a credible scientist needs to stand up either on behalf of industry or the opponents and say, these are the facts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because right now people are confused, they're tormented over this, they don't know which way to go. No one wants to live near some sort of industrial operation that could harm themselves or their kids. Industry wants to, in some instances, in the name of national defense, try to corral resources that are available in this country and provide them to people who are going to buy them, oil and gas and the like. But we've got to get this figured out. And I've long said this patchwork quilt of letting different cities do different things doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's hard to set the statewide standard when no one seems to be able to articulate clearly what the scientific facts are. So hopefully, with all the money that's being spent and all the attention being paid to this, hopefully some people get away from political persuasion and find a way to say, these are the facts, this is where we are, this is what we need to do.
Patty, is there an expert out there that the general public in Colorado would believe?
Well, we haven't seen that expert yet, have we? And what we have seen is there's going to be a huge amount of money from both sides coming in. This community rights bill, whether or not you're pro-fracking, there are going to be plenty of people who want to overturn it, because think about, or at least make sure it doesn't get through, think about how many different communities could ban almost any different business they want. I mean, obviously they already have the right to vote on whether or not they want recreational pot sales, but would you be voting against Chick-fil-A? Would you be voting against McDonald's? Would you be voting against a cheese factory? I mean, it'll be an interesting ballot measure that I think a lot of people are very, very concerned about, no matter how they feel about fracking, because if each municipality can come up with their own plans for what kind of business to accept, it becomes a problem. So I think if there's an expert out there, we're not going to hear them because there's going to be so much noise coming from all the other sides about fracking and this bill.
Amy, you have a unique perspective. You're in the epicenter of fracking in Colorado and Weld County. What do you think?
Well, what's interesting is Greeley's been down this road. The case law comes out of Greeley. Greeley, actually, the city of Greeley banned hydraulic fracturing in the early 90s. It was overturned by the Colorado State Supreme Court. Since then, they've had to figure out the relationship between surface and subsurface rights. And it's a marriage. It's not perfect, but you have to figure out how to make it work. Full disclosure, I live in a historic district in Greeley, but I've signed a mineral lease underneath my house, so there is hydraulic fracturing. There are 400 wells in the city of Greeley. I challenge people all the time. Find me 6. Name me where 6 of them are. And then, this is, Patty's right. This isn't, there's going to be money on both sides. There's going to be a lot of it. The Sierra Club, Food and Water Watch, these are not grassroots groups. It's big philanthropy. Then you have industry on the other side. There is a ton of money in this, and it isn't just about the oil and gas industry. It could be the largest takings ever in Colorado history.
Let's get a quick take on our topic about Governor Hickenlooper. He surprised some Capitol Hill watchers when he vetoed 2 bills that were sent to him late last week. Neither bill had a high profile, nor was considered very controversial. Penn, what's your quick take on this?
Well, I think part of it is the governor sending a message, because last year I think he didn't veto a single bill that came out of the session. One of these bills I know the Chamber of Commerce asked for a veto, as did Casey. I don't think they believed they were going to get it. They didn't lobby for it, and they got a gratuitous veto, and then one other got veto. I think the governor's just saying, I'm not just a rubber stamp. There are some things I'm going to veto. He may surprise us with some higher profile vetoes later this session, but I think he's just sort of putting people on notice.
Patty, is Governor Hickenlooper just warming up the pen?
I think he will probably veto some more bills before we're done. These were ones that, it wasn't just a political gambit on his part. I think they were easy vetoes for him because he didn't agree with the bills.
Amy, what do you think?
Well, wow. If he had vetoed bills he didn't agree with last year, perhaps whether it was the process or anything else, there were a couple of bills that certainly should have been vetoed because he questioned whether they were even workable. I think these were meaningless vetoes. Maybe he'll do one later. I have yet to see it. This is not a man that is politically courageous. I don't think. He waffles on so many issues. So what, he vetoed 2 meaningless bills.
Craig, wrap it up for us.
Well, one veto saved insurance companies a lot of money. I think as people adapt to Obamacare and Healthcare Colorado, the deductibles and the co-pays increase. This would have required the insurance company to pay those amounts. Instead, the consumers have to. I'm a member of the Colorado Trial Lawyers, and while Hickenlooper is better than probably any Republican, he has not been a great friend to the plaintiffs' bar.
Let's get to our very favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, start us off.
Well, it's opening day, which is great, but there's some problems in the Ballpark neighborhood, and it's unintended consequences of the homeless ordinance the anti-camping ban being passed without city services being provided that were promised. And if you go over by the ballpark neighborhood now and the Triangle Park that was named for Eddie Mestis, it's a mess, and the neighbors are upset with good reason.
Amy.
I had a tough time making a decision. I couldn't decide if I should do Mark Ruffalo weighing in on our fracking bans, but ultimately I went with the Democrats in the Senate Health and Human Services Committee for denying the audit of Connect for Health Colorado.
Craig.
That Idaho cop, if it's true, and I think it is, who profiled a Colorado resident for having Colorado plates, that's been the problem with the drug war and prohibition, the profiling. Mainly it's impacted people of color, but now if it impacts everybody with a Colorado license plate, how does that feel?
Penn.
Bobby Jindal, Paul Ryan, Cory Garner, and all of those who keep beating up on the Affordable Care Act, the reality is this. People are signing up, and Colorado has proven by what we've done with our exchange that if you take the approach that it's the law and we're going to figure out the best way to implement it so that it helps people, it can work.
Say something nice, 1 minute left.
Well, 20th season at Coors Field, and for all the problems at the ballpark neighborhood, what a great addition it has been to downtown.
Amy?
Brewers mascot Hank adopted the rescue dog out of spring training.
Craig.
It frustrates me with its bipartisanship, but APAC is sure better than J Street in my mind. I think they've been a little used and abused by the Obama administration, but they have their annual conference this Sunday, 11:30, Glendale Infinity Park.
Penn.
Congratulations to the Colorado Rockies. Please give us a season we can be proud of.
There's thousands of Rockies fans in that very same intent. Very well said. That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks very much for watching. Good night.